People say marriage is the grave of love, but mine was almost a literal tomb reeking of gas. I lived in a gilded cage with a perfect man and his paralyzed child. Yet, the moment my husband's luxury car vanished, the bedridden boy stood up, not by a miracle, but by pure hatred. His whisper tore through the silence. "Don't scream. Dad is trying to burn us alive. Sometimes, the savior is the one you pitied most." My name is Amelia Stonebridge, and until this morning, I defined my existence by the reflection I saw in my husband's eyes. The morning sun over the Hamptons always felt different than the sun anywhere else in America. It did not just rise, it announced itself, spilling liquid gold over the slate-gray Atlantic Ocean before crashing against the floor-to-ceiling tempered glass of our bedroom. From this vantage point, perched precariously on a limestone cliff, the world looked conquerable, organized, and distant. It was a view that cost millions of dollars, a view that Richard told me I deserved, even when the imposter syndrome whispered otherwise in the back of my mind. Richard Sterling was a man who moved with the precision of a Swiss watch mechanism. He was 45 years old, but he wore his age like a tailored suit, sophisticated, structured, and intimidating. Today was the beginning of his 3-day trip to Chicago to finalize a merger for Sterling Biolabs. It was the kind of deal that made the front page of the Wall Street Journal, the kind that involved 9 or 10 figures. As he stood before the mirror adjusting his tie, I watched him. The knot was a perfect Windsor, symmetrical and tight. Everything about Richard was tight. His schedule, his finances, his control. I sat on the edge of the California king bed, my hands folded in my lap. I was 32, a former nurse who had been swept out of the sterile, fluorescent hallways of the city hospital and dropped into this palace of marble and smart technology. Sometimes, I still woke up reaching for a pager that was no longer there. Richard turned to me, his smile practicing the charm that would disarm board members later that afternoon. He walked over, the scent of expensive sandalwood cologne drifting ahead of him. It was a smell I associated with safety, with the end of my financial struggles, with the life I thought I wanted. He reached out and adjusted the silk scarf around my neck. His fingers were cold, despite the warmth of the room. He tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear, his thumb lingering on my pulse point just a second longer than necessary. "You look beautiful." "Amelia," he said, his voice a smooth baritone, "but you look tired. Make sure you rest while I'm gone. No heavy lifting." "That is what the staff is for, though I gave them the weekend off so you could have some peace. Just you and Julian." I nodded, leaning into his touch. "I will be fine. Richard, it is just 3 days. He kissed my forehead. It was a dry, chaste kiss. "Listen to me. The security reports for this area have been troubling lately. Break-ins in East Hampton are up 20%. I do not want you taking any risks. Keep the perimeter alarm on. Do not open the gate for anyone unless I authorize it. I promise," I said. He smiled, satisfied with my obedience. "Good girl." We walked out of the bedroom and down the floating staircase. The house was a masterpiece of modern architecture, a cavernous expanse of 1,000 square meters dominated by white walls, black steel, and glass. It was beautiful, but it was the beauty of a museum, not a home. It echoed. Every footstep sounded like a gavel striking a desk. In the living room, Julian was waiting. My stepson sat in his motorized wheelchair, his head lolling slightly to the left. He was 12 years old, but he looked smaller, shrunken by the atrophy of his muscles. 4 years ago, a yachting accident had taken his mother's life and left him with severe brain damage and paralysis, or so the doctors said. So Richard said. Julian was a shell of a boy. His eyes often glazed over, his mouth slack, a thin line of saliva often trailed from the corner of his lip, staining the bib. I changed every few hours. Richard stopped in front of the wheelchair. He did not kneel. He hated wrinkling his suit pants. Instead, he bent at the waist, placing a heavy hand on Julian's messy brown hair. "I am leaving now, Julian," Richard said. his voice pitching up an octave into that saccharine tone adults use for toddlers or pets. "You be a good boy for Amelia, okay? No trouble." Julian did not react. His gaze remained fixed on the abstract painting on the far wall. His left hand twitched slightly on the armrest, a spasm the doctors called an involuntary neurological response. Richard patted the boy's head, ruffling the hair aggressively. "Goodbye, my little hero. Daddy will bring you back a souvenir. Maybe a snow globe. You like those, right?" The cruelty was subtle. Julian could not shake a snow globe. He could not even hold one, but I swallowed my comment. Richard was a man under immense pressure. He did not mean to be insensitive. I had to believe that. I had to believe that the man who rescued me from poverty, the man who paid off my student loans and moved me into a castle, was good at his core. I felt a surge of gratitude as I watched them. Most men in Richard's position would have institutionalized a child like Julian. They would have sent him to a facility in Switzerland or upstate New York and visited once a year for a photo opportunity. But Richard kept him here. He retrofitted the house. He hired me, initially as a private nurse. Before he fell in love with me, he let me be the mother Julian lost. It was noble. It was the reason I overlooked his temper, his controlling nature, and the way he checked my credit card statements line by line. Richard straightened up and checked his platinum watch. "I am behind schedule. The chopper is waiting at the private airfield." He pulled out his smartphone. It was the latest model, encrypted and linked directly to the house's central nervous system, the Sterling Smart Home mainframe. He tapped the screen rapidly. "I am setting the house to fortress mode. Amelia," he announced casually, as if discussing the weather. My stomach gave a small, involuntary lurch. Fortress mode was the highest security setting. It engaged the steel bolts on all exterior doors, locked the impact-resistant windows, and disabled the manual overrides on the gates. "Is that necessary?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "I cannot even order a pizza in fortress mode." "Richard," he looked at me, his eyes devoid of humor. "We have a freezer full of gourmet steaks. Amelia, you do not need pizza. I need to know you are safe. With this mode active, nothing gets in, and nothing gets out without my admin code. It is for your own good. Do not argue with me on this." I shrank back. "Okay, thank you." "Richard." He tapped the screen one last time. A heavy mechanical thud reverberated through the floorboards. It was the sound of 12 steel deadbolts sliding into place simultaneously across the sprawling residence. The green light on the wall-mounted security pad turned a solid, angry red. "I love you," he said, but he was already looking at the front door. "I love you too." I replied to his back. I watched through the sidelight as he walked to his silver Porsche Panamera. The morning mist swirled around his ankles. He got in. The engine roared to life, a guttural, aggressive sound, and the car tore down the long, paved driveway. The iron gates swung open just enough to let him pass and then slammed shut with a finality that made my teeth ache. He was gone. I turned back to the room. The silence rushed in to fill the space Richard had vacated. 1,000 square meters of silence. It was heavy, almost suffocating. The house, usually so vibrant with the tension of Richard's presence, now felt like a mausoleum. The ocean outside was just a silent movie playing behind thick glass. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the sudden claustrophobia. I had 3 days of freedom, 3 days to read my books, 3 days to garden in the atrium, 3 days to care for Julian without Richard hovering over my shoulder criticizing my technique. "Come on, Jules," I said softly, walking over to the wheelchair. "Let us get you situated." I unlocked the brakes on his chair and pushed him toward the center of the living room, positioning him so he could watch the waves crashing against the cliffs. He liked the ocean, or at least, he seemed calmer when he faced it. I went to the wall panel and selected his favorite playlist. Mozart's Piano Concerto No. 21 began to play softly through the invisible speakers hidden in the ceiling. The piano notes were crisp, floating through the sterile air like crystal dust. I knelt beside him. His head had slumped forward again. I took a soft muslin cloth from the pocket of my cardigan and gently wiped the corner of his mouth. I am going to make us some tea, Julian, and maybe I will read to you from that adventure book we started last week, the one about the treasure island. Does that sound good? He did not answer. He just stared past me, his eyes reflecting the gray water. I adjusted the blanket over his legs, smoothing out the expensive wool. It was a reflex, a nurse's habit. Check the patient, comfort the patient, ensure the vitals are stable. That was when I heard it. It was a sound so low it was almost a vibration. Felt in the teeth, rather than heard with the ears. I froze. It was coming from the ventilation ducts high above the fireplace. The central air conditioning system in the Sterling mansion was state-of-the-art. A whisper-quiet system that filtered out 99% of allergens and pollutants. It never made a sound. Richard would have fired the maintenance crew if it even squeaked, but this was a distinct, low-frequency drone, like a large hive of bees trapped in the walls. I stood up, frowning. The air in the room felt suddenly stagnant, despite the size of the space. Strange, I whispered. I walked over to the main control panel mounted near the kitchen entrance. It was a large touchscreen that controlled everything from the lighting to the humidity. I tapped the climate icon. The screen was bright and reassuring. System status, normal, air quality, optimal, temperature, 72 degrees. Zone, green. Everything looked perfect. The digital interface insisted that the house was functioning exactly as it should. There were no red warning triangles, no error codes. According to the brain of the house, nothing was wrong. I tapped the screen again, refreshing the page. Still green, still optimal. I looked back at the vent. The humming seemed to be getting slightly louder. Or maybe it was just my imagination amplifying it in the silence. I told myself I was being paranoid. Richard had just left. The house was in fortress mode. The security system was impenetrable. I was safe. We were safe. I turned back to Julian, forcing a smile onto my face. It is nothing. Jules, I said, though the words tasted like ash in my mouth. Just the house settling. It is a big house. After all, I did not know it then, but the house was not settling. It was waking up. And the monster that lived inside the walls had just been given the command to feed. The green light on the panel was not a sign of safety. It was the color of a lie. The perfect, silent, expensive lie that Richard Sterling had built around us. It had been exactly 30 minutes since the iron gates slammed shut. Sealing Richard's departure, the silence I had initially found unsettling had now mutated into something far more sinister. I was standing in the kitchen, a vast, gleaming space of stainless steel and black granite that Richard insisted was a chef's dream, though neither of us really cooked. The kettle was just beginning to boil for my tea when the smell hit me. It did not creep in subtly. It assaulted me. At first, it was the undeniable. Stomach-churning stench of rotten eggs, hydrogen sulfide. It is the smell of decay, of things long dead and forgotten in the dark. But beneath that thick, sulfurous layer, there was something else. A sharp, sweet undercurrent that stung the back of my nostrils. It smelled like burnt almonds. My nurse's training kicked in before my conscious mind did. That specific combination was not just a gas leak, it was a chemical cocktail designed to incapacitate quickly. I dropped the mug I was holding. It shattered against the floor, sending shards of porcelain skittering across the tiles. But I barely heard the noise. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Gas. I scrambled toward the massive Wolf Range cooker that dominated the center island. My hands were already shaking as I reached for the knobs. They were all in the 12 o'clock position, off. I touched the burners, cold. I ripped open the oven door, half expecting to find a pilot light extinguished. But the interior was dark and cool. The smell was not coming from the stove. A low hiss, louder than the earlier hum, began to permeate the room. It sounded like a nest of vipers waking up. I looked up, my eyes tracing the sound to the discreet, linear air vents running along the ceiling coving. The air conditioning system, the same system Richard had praised for its quiet efficiency, was now pumping a visible, wavering distortion into the air. It was spewing poison directly into the heart of the house. I covered my nose and mouth with the sleeve of my cardigan, panic rising in my throat like bile. I had to get out. I had to get Julian and get out. I sprinted from the kitchen into the main living area, my shoes squeaking on the polished floor. The smell was even stronger here. The air looked hazy, shimmering with the escaping fumes. "Julian!" I screamed, my voice muffled by the fabric of my sleeve. He was exactly where I had left him, slumped in his wheelchair facing the ocean view. He looked so small, so fragile against the backdrop of the impending disaster. I grabbed the handles of his chair, intending to wheel him to the front door, but then I remembered the fortress mode, the deadbolts, the electronic lockdown. I abandoned the chair for a second and ran to the nearest window. It was a massive pane of impact-resistant glass, designed to withstand hurricane-force winds and battering rams. I clawed at the locking mechanism, but the handle was rigid. It would not budge a millimeter. I looked at the smart home panel on the wall. The screen, which had been a reassuring green just minutes ago, was now frozen. It did not show a red warning. It did not show a fire alarm. It just displayed the time and the outside temperature, mocking me with its normalcy. Richard had locked us in, and he had disabled the safety overrides. "Help!" I screamed, slamming my open palm against the glass. The sound barely registered. The glass was too thick. Outside, the world was bright and indifferent. A seagull flew past, suspended in the blue sky, completely unaware that inside this aquarium of wealth, the water was turning to acid. I looked around frantically for something heavy. A bronze sculpture of a horse stood on a pedestal nearby. I grabbed it, the metal cold and heavy in my hands, and swung it with every ounce of hysterical strength I possessed against the window. Thud! The sculpture bounced off the glass, leaving not even a scratch, and fell to the floor with a dull clang. The vibration traveled up my arms, jarring my shoulders, but the barrier remained intact. We were sealed inside a vacuum. The dizziness hit me then. It was a sudden, violent vertigo that tilted the floor beneath my feet. My vision blurred at the edges, a gray vignette encroaching on the world. The burnt almond smell was cloying now, coating my tongue, filling my lungs. I coughed, a ragged hacking sound that tore at my throat. My knees felt like water. I stumbled back toward Julian. I had to get him. I had to hide us somewhere. Maybe the bathroom. Maybe if I filled the tub with water and we put wet towels over our faces. But my legs refused to cooperate. The neurological effects of the gas were instantaneous. My motor functions were shutting down. I collapsed. I did not fall gracefully. I crumpled, my hip hitting the hard marble floor with a sickening crack. Pain flared, but it felt distant, as if it were happening to someone else. I tried to push myself up, but my arms were like lead weights. I was paralyzed, trapped in my own failing body. I lay on my side, gasping for air that wasn't there. My cheek was pressed against the cold stone. From this angle, my line of sight was level with the wheels of Julian's chair. I could see his sneakers, expensive Nikes that had never touched the ground. Tears leaked from my eyes, hot and stinging. "I am sorry. Julian," I whispered, though I doubt any sound came out. "I am so sorry." My mind began to fracture. I thought of Richard's kiss on my forehead. "I want you safe." The irony was a physical weight on my chest. He had built a fortress not to keep the world out, but to keep the death in. We were going to die here. I was going to die next to a boy I had promised to protect, and he would never even know what was happening. He would just drift from his waking sleep into an eternal one. My eyelids fluttered. The gray vignette was becoming a black tunnel. The sound of the hissing gas was the only thing I could hear, a requiem for the Stonebridge legacy. And then, the impossible happened. At first, I thought it was a spasm. Julian's foot twitched. Then his leg moved. It was not the rhythmic, jerky tremors of a seizure I had seen 100 times before. It was deliberate. It was controlled. I blinked, trying to clear the fog from my eyes. Was I hallucinating? Was this the final mercy of a dying brain? Above me, the click of a buckle released. It was sharp and loud in the room. I watched, frozen in horror and awe, as the boy who had not moved a muscle below his neck in 4 years placed his hands on the armrests of his wheelchair. His knuckles turned white, the tendons in his forearms popped out. Defined and taut, he pushed. Julian Sterling stood up. He did not float up like an angel. He rose with the grim determination of a soldier rising from a trench. His legs shook violently, the muscles atrophied and weak from years of disuse. But they held. He locked his knees. He took a breath. Not a shallow gasp like mine, but a deep, controlled inhale, as if he were testing the air. "Julian?" I wheezed. He ignored me. He did not even look down. He took a step, then another. He walked with a pronounced limp, dragging his left leg slightly. His movements jerky and unpolished. But he was moving. He was walking. He headed straight for the grand fireplace on the far wall. It was a decorative masterpiece made of Italian marble, housing a realistic gas log set that we rarely used. I watched him through the haze, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. The paralyzed boy was crossing the room. He reached the fireplace and fell to his knees, not out of weakness, but with purpose. He reached behind the decorative brass fire dog, his small fingers groping for something hidden in the stonework. He found a seam in the marble that I had never noticed in 3 years of living there. He dug his fingernails in and pried a small panel loose. Behind it was a red valve. The master shut off. How did he know? The question floated in my mind, irrelevant and heavy. Julian gripped the valve with both hands. He grunted, a guttural sound of exertion that belonged to a man, not a child. He wrenched it clockwise. The metal screeched, resisting, but he threw his entire body weight into the turn. Clank, the valve turned. Instantly, the hissing noise from the ceiling vents sputtered and died. The angry serpent in the walls had been decapitated. The silence returned, but the air was still thick with poison. Julian did not stop. He used the mantle to pull himself back up, his face slick with sweat. He turned and scanned the room, his eyes scanning like a predator's. He spotted the liquor cabinet. He shambled toward it, grabbing a heavy crystal bottle of Belvedere vodka from the shelf. He did not open it. Instead, he turned toward the bottom of the floor-to-ceiling window, where a small decorative ventilation grate was set into the molding, too small for a person, but big enough for air. He smashed the neck of the bottle against the corner of the wall to break the glass, creating a jagged edge. Then he used the heavy base of the bottle to hammer against the small metal grate. Bang, bang, bang. The metal grate bent. He hit it again. The drywall around it crumbled. He kicked it with his sneaker, putting his heel through the mesh. A draft of cold, salty ocean air rushed in. It was faint, but it was real. He dropped to the floor, putting his face near the hole, gulping down the clean air. He took 3 massive breaths, filling his lungs, purging the toxins. Then, he turned back to me. He crawled across the floor. The boy who was supposed to be a vegetable was crawling toward me with the intensity of a first responder. He reached me and grabbed the front of my blouse, pulling my upper body off the cold floor. His face was inches from mine. For the first time, I saw his eyes clearly. They were not glazed. They were not vacant. They were ice blue, sharp, terrifyingly intelligent, and burning with a rage that seemed centuries old. "Do not faint," he commanded. His voice was rasping, unused to speech, but the diction was perfect. It was not the voice of a child. It was the voice of someone who had spent years screaming on the inside. I stared at him, my mouth opening and closing like a fish. "Breathe." "Emilia," he ordered, shaking me roughly. Shallow breaths. "Keep your head down near the floor. The gas is lighter than air. It is rising." I obeyed blindly, taking small sips of the air near the carpet. The oxygen cleared a fraction of the fog in my brain. "You can walk," I stammered, the words slurring. He ignored the statement. He reached out and slapped my cheek, hard enough to sting, hard enough to bring the blood back to the surface. "Listen to me," he hissed, his eyes locking onto mine with a ferocity that frightened me more than the gas. "You are not allowed to die. Not today." "Why?" I whispered, tears streaming down my face, mixing with the sweat and the residue of the gas. "Why is this happening?" He leaned in closer, his whisper cutting through the ringing in my ears like a scalpel. "Because he does not just want us dead," Julian said, his lip curling into a sneer that looked disturbingly like his father's. "He wants a payout, if we burn up too much. The forensic evidence is compromised. He wants the bodies intact so he can claim the double indemnity." He gripped my shoulder, his fingers digging into my flesh. "Richard is not trying to scare us. Amelia, he is trying to harvest us. Now get up. We have work to do." My reality had fractured into a kaleidoscope of impossible images. I was lying on the cold marble floor, the taste of bile and chemicals heavy on my tongue. Looking up at a boy who should not be standing, my mind, starved of oxygen and flooded with adrenaline, desperately tried to categorize this as a hallucination. It had to be the gas. Carbon monoxide or hydrogen sulfide poisoning often caused delirium. I convinced myself that I was currently dying, fading into the final synapse firings of a shutting down brain, and this was my subconscious conjuring a savior because I was too terrified to die alone. Julian stood over me, but he was not the Julian I knew. The slack-jawed, empty gaze was gone, replaced by a terrifying intensity. He reached into the pocket of his oversized hoodie, clothing I had dressed him in this morning, and pulled out a thick wet cloth. He must have soaked it in the ice bucket from the minibar while I was unconscious. He pressed it firmly against my face. The shock of the cold water forced a gasp out of me, and the damp fabric filtered the air, making it easier to breathe. "I am dreaming," I mumbled into the cloth, my voice trembling. "You are paralyzed. You have the mental capacity of a 6-year-old. This is not real." Julian leaned in close, his lips brushing my ear. The smell of him, baby powder and innocence, was now incongruous with the steel in his voice. "Look up," he whispered. "Slowly. To your left. The smoke detector." I shifted my gaze. The small white disc on the ceiling blinked with a rhythmic, malicious red light. "That is not a smoke detector," Julian hissed. "It is a high-definition lens with night vision and audio pickup. He is watching us right now. He is waiting for us to stop twitching." The boy gripped my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep with surprising strength. "Act, Amelia. If you want to live, you have to act. Do not look at the camera. Look at me. Look scared. Look like you are fading." I stared at him, the fog in my brain beginning to recede just enough to let the horror in. This was not a hallucination. The pain in my arm was too sharp, the water on my face too cold. Julian, my sweet, broken Julian, was looking at me with the eyes of a seasoned combat veteran. "We need to move," he murmured, his mouth barely moving. "There is a blind spot, the guest bathroom under the stairs." He did not put a camera in there because he thought it was too small to hide in. He was arrogant. Julian grabbed me under the armpits. I tried to push myself up, but my legs felt like rubber. We were a grotesque pair, a woman poisoned by her own home and a boy pretending to be a cripple, shuffling across the polished floor. To the camera, it must have looked like the final, desperate throes of dying animals. I let my head loll back, feigning unconsciousness, while my feet scrabbled for purchase. We collapsed through the door of the small guest bathroom. Julian kicked the door shut with his heel and locked it. The space was tiny, tiled in dark slate, smelling of the lavender potpourri I had placed there 2 days ago. It was the only room in the house that felt unconnected to the digital nervous system Richard had installed. We sat huddled on the bath mat. Julian slumped against the toilet, his chest heaving. The physical exertion of dragging me had taken a toll on his atrophied muscles. He was trembling now, not from fear, but from sheer physical exhaustion. I stared at him, wiping the water from my face. The silence in the small room was deafening. "Who are you?" I whispered. The question felt absurd. but it was the only one that mattered. He looked at me, and for a second, the mask slipped back on, the dull eyes, the slack mouth, before he shook his head and banished it. "I am the boy who held his breath," he said. His voice was raspy, deeper than I expected. "You have been faking it?" I asked, my voice rising in hysteria. "For 4 years? I have bathed you. I have changed your diapers. I have read you bedtime stories. You sat there and watched me cry over you. I had to," he said simply. If I showed any sign of recovery, any sign that my brain was intact, he would have finished the job. "Finish the job?" I echoed. "The yacht, Amelia, the accident." I shook my head. "It was a storm. Your mother fell overboard. You hit your head trying to save her. That is the story he told the police. That is the story he told you." Julian closed his eyes for a moment, and a look of ancient pain crossed his young face. There was no storm. The water was calm. My mother did not fall. Richard pushed her. The air left my lungs. I was 8 years old. Julian continued, his voice devoid of emotion, which made it all the more terrifying. "I saw him do it. We were on the aft deck. She was arguing with him about her trust fund. She wanted a divorce. She told him she was going to cut him off. He hit her. He hit her so hard she went over the railing. She hit her head on the swim platform on the way down." I covered my mouth, nausea roiling in my stomach. I screamed. Julian said, "I ran to the edge. I saw her floating face down in the water. I turned around, and he was there. He was holding a heavy bronze cleat he had ripped from the deck. He swung it at me. He pointed to the jagged scar hidden beneath his hairline. A scar I had washed 1,000 times, believing it was from the boat's railing. He cracked my skull. He threw me into the water to drown with her. He thought I was dead, but I didn't drown. I held my breath. I sank, and I waited until the Coast Guard arrived. By the time they pulled me out, the hypothermia and the trauma made me look catatonic. The doctor said it was permanent brain damage. Richard cried on TV. He played the grieving widower perfectly, but when we were alone in the hospital room, he leaned over my bed and whispered, "If you ever wake up, Julian, I will put you back to sleep permanently." I stared at the boy, the pieces of the last 4 years rearranging themselves in my mind. The way Richard always hovered when Julian had a checkup, the way he insisted on private doctors on his payroll, the way he discouraged me from trying new therapies. He was not protecting a sick child. He was guarding a prisoner. "So you just decided to stop pretending today?" I asked. I did not have a choice. Julian said, "Today is Judgment Day." "What does that mean?" "It means the money is gone." "Amelia, all of it." I shook my head. "That is impossible. Sterling Biolabs is about to merge. The stock is at an all-time high. We live in a castle. We live in a house of cards," Julian corrected. He gambled it away, not just at casinos, but on high-risk futures, illegal offshore investments, and cryptocurrency scams. He is leveraged to the hilt. The merger is a fraud. The books are cooked. The SEC sent him a subpoena 3 days ago. He is not in Chicago signing a deal. He is likely at a motel off the interstate, watching us die on his iPad. I felt the room spinning again. Richard, my Richard, the man who checked the locks 3 times, the man who invested in municipal bonds because they were safe. "He needs the life insurance," Julian said, cutting through my denial. $10 million on you, $5 million on me, plus the house insurance. That is enough to pay off the loan sharks and buy him a new identity in a non-extradition country. But gas? I stammered. "Why not just—" "Because he is a coward," Julian spat. "He does not want blood on his hands if he can help it. He wants a tragic accident. The narrative will be that the poor, exhausted stepmother forgot to turn off the stove after making tea. The gas filled the house. You passed out. I was helpless in my chair. We suffocated peacefully. Then, at exactly 2 o'clock, the timer on the ignition system he rigged in the basement will spark. The whole house goes up. No autopsies, no evidence, Just ashes and a tragic story for the evening news. I retched. I leaned over the toilet bowl and vomited until there was nothing left but acid. The betrayal was a physical blow, a knife twisting in my gut. The man who had kissed my forehead this morning, who had told me to stay safe, had locked me in a gas chamber. He had looked me in the eye and sentenced me to death, when I finally lifted my head, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand. I saw Julian watching me with a mixture of pity and impatience. "I know it hurts," he said softly. "I know you loved him, but the man you loved never existed." He was a character Richard played. "I cannot believe it," I whispered, though I knew it was true. "I need to see it." Julian nodded. He reached into the cushion of his wheelchair, which was squeezed into the small bathroom with us. He ripped open a seam in the upholstery that I had never noticed. From the padding, he pulled out a phone. It was not a smartphone. It was an ancient, black Nokia brick, the kind that held a charge for a week. "Where did you get that?" I asked. "I stole it from the gardener 2 years ago." He said, "I charge it at night when everyone is asleep. Using a USB cable I spliced into the back of the TV. I have been recording him. Amelia, every time he thought I was asleep or staring at the wall, he would talk on the phone in front of me. He thought I was furniture." He pressed a button and held the phone out to me. The audio was grainy, but the voice was unmistakable. It was Richard. Recording 1. Saturday, 3 weeks ago. "I am telling you, Victoria, it is almost done. The policy goes active on the 1st of the month. I just need to set the stage." A woman's voice, high-pitched and whining, answered, "But what about the boy? I don't want to deal with a cripple." Richard's laugh sent a shiver down my spine. "Don't worry about the vegetable. He is part of the package. A tragic collateral damage. It will make the story more sympathetic. CEO loses entire family in freak accident. The public will eat it up." Recording 2. Yesterday evening. Yeah, I rigged the HVAC. I bypassed the safety sensors. It was easy. The tech guys at the company showed me how to override the system for the lab tests. I will trigger it remotely once I'm clear of the perimeter. She won't suspect a thing. She trusts me blindly. She is a sweet girl, really. Dumb as a rock, but sweet. It is a shame, honestly. But 10 million is 10 million. The recording ended with a click. I sat there, staring at the cheap plastic phone. Dumb as a rock, that was what he thought of me. I was just a pawn, a signature on an insurance document, a disposable object. The rage did not come all at once. It started as a cold numbness in my fingertips and slowly spread inward. Freezing my heart, I looked at the reflection in the mirror. I looked pale, messy, and terrified. But behind the fear, something else was waking up. "He is going to kill us," I said, my voice steady for the first time. "He is going to try." Julian corrected. He put the phone back into his pocket. But he made a mistake. He forgot that the vegetable has eyes, and he forgot that the dumb nurse knows how to keep people alive. Julian grabbed my hand. His grip was weak, but his spirit was iron. "We are not victims today. Amelia, we are the consequences of his actions, but we have to be smart. He expects us to be dead in 20 minutes. When he checks the cameras and sees we are missing, he will come back. He has to. He cannot blow up the house if he doesn't know where the bodies are." He looked at the door. "We have to clear the gas. We have to arm ourselves. And we have to be ready, because when he comes back through that door, he won't be playing the loving husband anymore. He will be coming to finish what the gas didn't." I nodded slowly. The Amelia who arranged flowers and cooked dinner was gone. In her place was a woman who had just heard her husband laugh about her murder. "What do we do?" I asked. Julian smiled, a grim, humorless twisting of his lips. "We turn his smart house into a haunted house." The silence in the guest bathroom was shattered not by an explosion, but by a vibration. It was a low, insistent buzzing against the porcelain of the sink where I had left my phone, in the claustrophobic quiet of our hiding spot. The sound was as loud as a jackhammer. I stared at the screen. The name flashing on the display made my blood run cold. Hubby. A picture of Richard and me from our honeymoon in Bora Bora smuts up at me. We looked so happy, tanned, and carefree. It felt like looking at a photograph of two strangers from a different century. "He is calling FaceTime," I whispered, my voice trembling. He knows. He knows we are not dead yet." Julian snatched the phone from the counter before I could recoil. He looked at the screen with a calm, analytical detachment, as if he were studying a math problem rather than a death threat. "You have to answer it," Julian said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Are you insane?" I hissed. "I cannot talk to him. I will scream. I will tell him I know everything." "No." Julian grabbed my wrist, his grip surprisingly painful. "Think, Emilia. If you do not answer, he assumes two things. One, we are already dead, which is good, but then he might trigger the ignition early to finish the job. Or two, he assumes we are escaping, and he calls the police to report a gas leak to trap us. Or he comes back here with a gun immediately. We need to buy time." He shoved the phone into my hands. "You are an actress now. Emilia, this is the most important role of your life. You are not angry. You are not scared. You are dying. Do you understand? You are sleepy. You are confused. You are fading." I looked at the phone. The ringing seemed to be getting louder, demanding attention. "We have to go back out there," Julian commanded. "He cannot see us in the bathroom. He needs to see us in the kill zone." The thought of stepping back into that living room, under the gaze of those cameras, made my knees buckle. But Julian was already moving. He unlocked the door and motioned for me to follow. "Wait," he stopped me. He reached up and roughed up my hair, pulling strands loose until I looked disheveled. Then, he grabbed a handful of talcum powder from the shelf and slapped it onto my cheeks and forehead. "You look too healthy," he critiqued. "Rub your eyes, make them red." I rubbed my eyes furiously until they stung and watered. I looked in the mirror. The woman staring back was pale, wild-eyed, and looked on the verge of collapse. It was not entirely acting. Terror had done half the work. "Go," Julian whispered. "Sofa, now." We moved quickly. I pushed Julian back into his wheelchair in the center of the living room, positioning him exactly as he had been before, slumped over, head down, the picture of a helpless victim. I threw myself onto the beige linen sofa, sprawling out in a way that looked uncoordinated and heavy. The phone was still ringing. It was a miracle it had not gone to voicemail yet. I took a deep breath, holding it in my lungs until they burned, trying to force my heart rate to slow down. I needed to sound groggy. I needed to sound like my brain was starved of oxygen. I tapped the green button. The screen filled with Richard's face. He was in his car. I could see the leather headrest and the blur of passing trees through the window. He was wearing his driving sunglasses, the expensive aviators he loved, which hid his eyes. But I could see his mouth. It was set in a tight line that relaxed into a fake, concerned smile the moment the connection established. "Emilia?" "Oh, thank God." Richard's voice filled the room, smooth and rich. "I have been texting you." "Why did you not answer?" I was getting worried. I held the phone at a weird angle, letting it tilt as if my wrist were too weak to hold it up. I made sure the background showed the living room, the motionless form of Julian in the chair, and the hazy light filtering through the windows. Richard I slurred my words, letting my eyelids droop heavily. "I don't know. I didn't hear it. You look terrible." "Honey," he said. The concern in his voice was so genuine, so practiced, that it made my skin crawl. "What is wrong? Are you feeling okay?" "I have a headache," I moaned, touching my temple. "It hurts. Richard, it hurts so bad, and I'm so dizzy. I think I need to lie down." Richard leaned closer to his camera. I could see the reflection of his dashboard in his sunglasses. He was searching my face, looking for the telltale signs of carbon monoxide poisoning, the cherry red flush, the confusion, the lethargy, thanks to the talcum powder and my genuine nausea. "I must have looked the part. It is probably just the pressure change," he said soothingly. Or maybe you are coming down with that flu that is going around. Is Julian okay? I moved the camera slightly to show the back of Julian's head. He is sleeping, I mumbled. He has been sleeping for a long time. I can't wake him up for his lunch. Good, Richard said. The words slipped out too quickly. Too sharply. He cleared his throat. Let him sleep. Rest is good for him. And you should sleep too. Amelia. I closed my eyes for a long moment, letting the silence stretch. I wanted him to think I was drifting off right there on the call. Amelia? Richard called out, his voice sharper. Amelia, stay with me. I jerked my eyes open, feigning a startle. Yeah, I am here. Just so tired. Did you check the kitchen? He asked casually. The question was the hook. He needed to know if the gas was still flowing. I was worried you might have left the stove on. You know how forgetful you get when you are stressed. I felt a surge of pure hatred so intense I thought it would burn through the camera lens. He was gaslighting me even as he murdered me. I checked I lied, keeping my voice trailing off. The knobs are off, but it smells funny in here. Richard, like eggs. I saw his jaw tighten. He was analyzing the data. If I could smell the gas, I should be dead by now, or at least unconscious. He was calculating the dosage, wondering why I was still able to hold a phone. It is just the drains. Amelia, he said quickly, the plumber is coming next week. Don't worry about it. Just close your eyes. I feel sick. I whispered. I'm going to sleep now. Yes, he said softly. His voice dropped to a hypnotic register. Sleep. Take a deep, deep nap. Do not fight it. I will see you soon. I let the phone slip from my hand onto the sofa cushions, leaving the camera pointing at the ceiling. I listened. Amelia? He called one last time. I stayed silent, breathing shallowly, loud enough for the microphone to pick up. After 10 seconds, the line went dead. The moment the screen went black, I exploded. I sat up, gasping for air as if I had been underwater. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely brush the hair out of my face. Did he believe it? I asked, my voice cracking. Did I do it? Julian did not move immediately. He stayed in the wheelchair, his head cocked to the side, listening to the echoes of the house. Then, he slowly lifted his head. The vacancy was gone from his eyes, replaced by a dark, brooding storm. He bought the symptoms, Julian said, his voice flat. But he did not buy the timeline. What do you mean? The gas has been on for 40 minutes, Julian explained, based on the cubic footage of this room and the flow rate of the HVAC system. You should not be talking. You should be convulsing or comatose. He saw you moving. He heard you forming coherent sentences, even if you tried to slur them. Julian wheeled himself over to the coffee table where he had left the iPad he used for his educational games. His fingers flew across the screen with the dexterity of a professional hacker. He is suspicious, Julian muttered. He is a control freak. He does not like variables. If he thinks the gas isn't working fast enough, he won't wait for the timer. What are you doing? I asked, leaning over his shoulder. The screen was black with lines of green code scrolling rapidly. I am into his cloud account, Julian said. I memorized his passwords years ago. I track his GPS. A map popped up on the screen. A blue dot represented us in the Hamptons. A red dot represented Richard's phone. He said he was going to Chicago. Julian said, that means he should be heading west toward JFK or LaGuardia. We watched the red dot. It was stationary on the Long Island Expressway, about 40 miles away. He is at a rest stop, Julian said. Then, the red dot moved. It did not continue west toward the airport. It made a U-turn. It merged back onto the highway, heading east, heading toward us. He is coming back, I whispered, the blood draining from my face. He is not just coming back, Julian said, zooming in on the map. Look at his speed. 80 miles per hour. 90. He is driving like a maniac. Why? Why come back? Because he wants to make sure, Julian said grimly. He probably thinks a window is open or the system malfunctioned. He is coming to finish it with his own hands. He cannot risk us surviving and failing the toxicity test at the hospital. He needs corpses. Amelia, how long? I asked. Julian did the math in his head instantly. Traffic is light this time of day. He is 40 miles out. At that speed, 45 minutes. Maybe less if he ignores speed traps. 45 minutes. The number hung in the air like a guillotine blade. We had less than an hour before a man who had already tried to gas us would walk through that front door, and this time, he would not be relying on an invisible gas. He would have weapons. He would have the rage of a plan gone wrong. "We have to leave," I said, panic rising again. "We have to break a window, use a chair, anything." "And where?" Julian countered. "The moment we breach the perimeter sensors. His phone gets an alert. He will know we are active. He will call the police and say his wife is having a psychotic break. He has the narrative controlled. Amelia, if we run, we look guilty. If we run, he hunts us down." "So we stay?" I asked incredulously. "We stay in the house he is trying to blow up?" "We stay," Julian said, his eyes narrowing. "But we change the game. He thinks he is coming back to a graveyard. He thinks he is coming back to a sleeping wife and a crippled boy." Julian looked at me, and a terrifying smile touched his lips. It was the smile of a predator who has just realized the trap is actually a hunting ground. "We have 45 minutes to turn this house into a weapon." He said, "He locked us in here with his expensive toys. Now, we are going to use them to break him." He pointed to the heavy oak door of Richard's study down the hall. "First, we need the gun," Julian said. "Richard has a gun?" "A Sig Sauer 9mm in the wall safe," Julian replied. "The combination is his birthday. He is a narcissist. He uses the same numbers for everything. Go get it. I have to rewire the hallway lights." "Rewire them? Why?" "Because," Julian said, wheeling himself toward the utility closet, "darkness is our friend now. When he walks through that door, I want him to feel exactly what I felt for 4 years, helpless, confused, and terrified." I watched the 12-year-old boy maneuver the wheelchair with purpose. The fear was still there, pounding in my chest, but it was being overtaken by something colder, something harder. Richard was coming back to kill us. He was driving 90 miles per hour to watch life leave my eyes. I looked at the map one last time. The red dot was inching closer. I turned and ran toward the study. I was not a nurse anymore. I was not a wife. I was a soldier in a war I had not asked for, but I was going to fight. 45 minutes. I whispered to the empty house. "Let him come." The digital clock on the oven display read 1:15 in the afternoon. We had 45 minutes. 45 minutes before the silver Porsche would come tearing up the driveway, carrying a man who had already mourned us in his mind. The house was sealed tight. I ran to the front door, my fingers flying over the keypad, but the screen simply flashed a red lock icon. Access denied. Fortress mode was designed to keep intruders out, but Richard had weaponized it to keep his victims in. Breaking the glass was not an option, even if we managed to shatter the impact-resistant panes. The sensors would trigger an immediate breach alarm on Richard's phone. He would know we were active. He would call the police, frame us as intruders, or claim I had snapped. And he would have the perfect excuse to shoot us the moment he arrived. "We have to fight him inside," Julian said. He was leaning against the kitchen island, his face pale but his eyes burning with a feverish intensity. "He thinks he is walking into a morgue. We need to make sure he walks into a slaughterhouse." I looked at the boy, my stepson, my partner. The fear that had paralyzed me earlier was evaporating, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. It was the same feeling I used to get in the emergency room when a trauma case rolled in. Panic was a luxury I could not afford. "Where is the gun?" I asked. "You said there was a gun." "Richard's study," Julian replied. "The wall safe behind the painting of the hunt." We moved quickly. I supported Julian as we navigated the hallway, his atrophied legs dragging slightly on the plush carpet. When we reached the study, the smell of Richard hit me. Leather, expensive cigars, and the faint, metallic tang of ink. It was the smell of authority. For years, I had been afraid to even dust this room without permission. Now, I was about to tear it apart. I pulled the heavy oil painting away from the wall. Behind it sat a sleek, digital safe. He uses his birthday for everything, I said, reaching for the keypad. August 12th. No, Julian stopped me, his voice devoid of emotion. Not for this. This is where he keeps his trophies, the things that make him feel powerful. Then what is the code? I asked, my finger hovering over the numbers. October 14th, Julian stated. I paused. The date felt familiar, but I could not place it. October 14th, 1014. Why that date? I asked as I punched in the numbers. The lock beeped once, a cheerful chirp, and the heavy steel door swung open. Because that is the day he killed my mother, Julian whispered. The breath hitched in my throat. I looked inside the dark metal box. There it was, a matte black Sig Sauer handgun lying on a velvet cloth. Beside it was a stack of papers and a small velvet box. I reached in and took the gun. It was heavier than I expected, cold and greasy to the touch. I checked the magazine. It was full. I had never fired a gun in my life, but I knew the mechanics of it. Point and squeeze. Take the papers, Julian commanded. You need to see them. I grabbed the thick envelope. It was a life insurance policy from a company I had never heard of, likely an offshore insurer that asked fewer questions. I flipped to the back page. There was my name, printed in block letters, Amelia Stonebridge Sterling, and next to it, the payout amount, $10 million. The policy date was from last week. My knees felt weak, but I did not fall. I stared at the number, $10 million. That was the value of my life to him. That was the price of my breath, my laughter, my devotion. I was not a wife. I was an asset to be liquidated. There is more, Julian said, pointing to a manila folder at the bottom of the stack. I opened it. Inside were ultrasound photos, a blurry, black and white image of a fetus. Clipped to the photos was a lease agreement for a penthouse in Paris, signed by Richard Sterling and a woman named Victoria Miller. She is 25, Julian said, his voice dripping with disgust. She was his personal assistant 2 years ago. She is pregnant. That is why he is in a rush. He wants a clean slate. New wife, new baby, new life, and $10 million to start it all. I looked at the ultrasound. Then I looked at the gun in my hand. Something inside me snapped. It was not a loud break. It was a quiet, decisive severance. The Amelia who worried about mismatched throw pillows, the Amelia who desperately sought Richard's approval, died in that moment. In her place stood a woman who held death in her right hand and the evidence of her betrayal in her left. He wants to clear the board, I said, my voice low and steady. He thinks we are trash to be taken out. He is about to find out that trash can burn, Julian replied. We left the study and headed back to the main foyer. The grand entrance of the house was a vast expanse of polished Italian marble, slick and gleaming under the crystal chandelier. It was Richard's pride and joy. He made everyone take their shoes off before stepping on it. Go to the pantry. I told Julian, get every bottle of cooking oil we have. Vegetables, olive, canola, everything. Julian nodded and shuffled off. I ran to the cleaning supply closet. I grabbed bottles of bleach, ammonia, oven cleaner, and a large bag of chili powder from the spice rack. We met in the foyer. The clock ticked. 30 minutes left. I unscrewed the caps of the oil bottles. There were 5 gallons in total. Richard liked to buy in bulk from gourmet suppliers. I began to pour. The golden liquid glugged out, pooling on the white marble, spreading like a viscous lake. I covered the area directly in front of the main door. Extending 10 feet into the room, it is invisible against the polished stone. Julian noted with approval. He will come in fast. He will be angry. He won't be looking at his feet. We created a slip zone that was essentially ice. Next, the chemical warfare. I took the spray bottles of heavy-duty oven cleaner and poured out half the contents. I used a funnel to dump generous amounts of the extra hot chili powder into the bottles, shaking them vigorously until the liquid turned a menacing rusty orange. Pepper spray on steroids, Julian said. If that gets in his eyes or lungs, He will be blind and choking for at least 10 minutes. I handed one bottle to Julian and kept one for myself. We tested the nozzles. A fine spicy mist shot out. It burned my nose just standing near it. "We need a kill box," Julian said, looking up at the staircase. "When he falls, he will get up. He is strong. We need to funnel him to a place where we have the advantage. The master bedroom," I suggested. "It has the only other door with a heavy lock." "No." Julian shook his head. "If we lock ourselves in, we are trapped again. We need to lure him in." He looked at the smart home panel on the wall. "I can strip the wiring from the hallway sconces," he said, his mind working at a speed I could barely follow. "I can rig the handle of the bedroom door. If he touches it without rubber gloves, he gets 120 volts. It won't kill him, but it will paralyze his arm." "Do it," I said. Julian gathered his tools, a pair of wire cutters he had stolen from the maintenance shed years ago, and a roll of electrical tape. We moved up the stairs. The boy worked with the precision of a surgeon. He unscrewed the light fixture next to the bedroom door, pulled out the live wires, and spliced them into a long extension cord he had cut. He wrapped the exposed copper wire around the brass door handle, hiding the connection on the underside where it would not be visible to a tall man looking down. He stepped back and looked at his work. "It is live," he warned. "Do not touch that handle." I looked at the scene, the oil slick downstairs, the chemical weapons in our hands, the electrified door. We had turned the sterile, luxury mansion into a gauntlet of pain. 20 minutes. We retreated into the shadows of the upstairs landing, hiding behind the heavy velvet curtains that overlooked the foyer. This was our sniper's nest. From here, we could see the front door, but he would not see us unless he looked straight up. I checked the gun again. The safety was off. My finger rested on the trigger guard. "Amelia," Julian whispered. He was sitting on the floor next to me, his legs stretched out. He looked exhausted, but his hand gripped the modified spray bottle tightly. "Yeah? If he gets past the oil, and the electricity, and the spray," Julian hesitated. "You have to shoot him. You cannot hesitate. If he gets his hands on us, he will snap our necks. He won't monologue. He won't gloat. He is a cleaner." I looked at the ultrasound photo I had shoved into my pocket. I thought of Victoria, 25 years old, picking out curtains for my house, planning a nursery for her baby while my stepson and I burned to ash in the basement. I thought of Richard's fake smile, his cold kisses, the way he had looked at me on the phone and told me to die. "I will not hesitate," I said. The engine of the Porsche died outside, cutting off the aggressive growl that had heralded his arrival. The sudden silence that followed was heavier than the noise. It pressed against the windows of the mansion, a suffocating blanket of anticipation. We had killed the lights. Every single switch had been flipped, plunging the interior of the house into a gloom that was only broken by the shafts of afternoon sunlight piercing through the cracks in the heavy velvet drapes. The house, usually a beacon of modern illumination, now looked like a derelict ship drifting in deep water. Julian and I were crouched low on the second-floor landing, our bodies pressed against the cold plaster of the wall, hidden behind the thick balusters of the grand staircase. This was our sniper's nest, our theater box, from which we would watch the opening act of our survival. My heart was beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a physical thumping that I was terrified he would hear the moment he stepped inside. I gripped the Sig Sauer with sweaty palms, the metal slick and foreign in my hand. Beside me, Julian was a statue of concentrated hate, his face illuminated faintly by the lowest brightness setting of his iPad screen. We heard the heavy crunch of boots on gravel. It was a confident walk, the walk of a man who owned the ground beneath his feet, a man who believed he was coming home to a tragedy he had scripted perfectly. Beep, 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 click. The electronic lock disengaged. The sound echoed through the cavernous foyer like a gunshot. The heavy oak door swung open, slicing a wedge of blinding white daylight across the darkened marble floor. A silhouette stepped into the frame. It was Richard, but it was not the husband who had kissed me goodbye hours earlier. He had shed the suit jacket. His white dress shirt was rolled up to the elbows, revealing forearms that I knew were strong enough to lift me. He wore black leather gloves, tight and sinister. In his left hand, he carried a large black duffel bag that clanked metallically as he moved. Tools for a crime scene, rope to bind bodies, or perhaps accelerants to ensure the fire took everything. But it was his face that froze the blood in my veins. He was wearing a full-face industrial gas mask, the kind with dual filtration canisters that made him look like an insectoid monster. The mask completely dehumanized him. There were no eyes, only reflective black lenses. There was no mouth, only a rubber vent. He stepped onto the threshold, pausing for a moment to let his eyes adjust to the sudden darkness of the interior. "Emilia?" he called out. The voice was muffled by the mask, distorted into a deep, robotic growl. It was the stuff of nightmares. "Julian? Daddy is home." He took a step forward, expecting silence, expecting death. He stood there for a second, tilting his head, likely listening for the hiss of gas or the sound of labored breathing. But the house was silent, and more importantly, the air was wrong, even through the filters, or perhaps because the filters were not reacting as they should. He sensed it. The overwhelming stench of rotten eggs and almonds was gone, replaced by the sharp, stinging aroma of the ammonia and chili powder we had prepped. Though he was not close enough to the trap to smell that yet, he reached up and ripped the mask off his face, tossing it carelessly onto the porch behind him. His face was flushed, his hair matted with sweat from the drive. His expression was not one of concern, it was one of confusion and irritation. He sniffed the air, his nose wrinkling. "Damn it," he muttered. The cheap thing must have clogged. He thought the system had failed. He thought the gas had simply stopped flowing. He did not know he was walking into a war zone. He reached to his belt and unsnapped a leather sheath. The sound of the steel blade sliding out was a sharp shing that vibrated up to the second floor. It was a hunting knife, the one he used for deer trips he never actually went on. The blade was 6 inches long, serrated at the base. He stepped fully into the foyer. I held my breath, my finger tightening on the trigger guard of the gun. Just one more step. "Richard, just one more." He took it. His leather-soled dress shoe landed squarely in the center of the 5-gallon lake of vegetable oil we had poured across the marble. The friction coefficient of the floor dropped to 0. It happened with a violence that was shocking to witness. His lead foot shot forward as if it had been pulled by a cable. His body, carrying all the momentum of his angry stride, went horizontal in the air. His arms flailed wildly, a windmill of panic, but there was nothing to grab. Only air and the slick, unforgiving stone. Crack! Richard slammed onto the marble floor flat on his back. The sound was sickening. A wet, heavy thud of bone-striking stone that echoed all the way to the vaulted ceiling. The air left his lungs in a forceful whoosh. The black duffel bag flew from his hand, sliding across the oily surface and crashing into the wall. Spilling coils of thick rope and a heavy wrench, the hunting knife clattered away, spinning on the floor like a top before coming to rest near the base of the stairs. For a moment, he just lay there, stunned, gasping for breath, staring up at the chandelier. Julian squeezed my arm. His grip was tight, triumphant, down below. Richard groaned. It was a guttural sound of pain. He rolled onto his side, clutching his lower back. He tried to push himself up, planting his gloved hands on the floor, but the oil was everywhere. His hands slipped out from under him, and his face smashed into the floor again. He scrambled like a beetle on its back, his dignity stripping away with every slip. He was covered in the golden slime. It soaked his expensive shirt, his hair, his face. "You little rats!" he screamed. The voice was raw, unrestrained. The mask of the loving husband was gone, shattered on the floor along with his composure. "I know you are here. You think this is funny? You think you can play games with me?" He managed to get to his knees, moving slowly, testing the friction. He wiped the oil from his eyes, smearing it across his forehead. He looked around, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He realized now, this was not a malfunction. An HVAC system did not pour cooking oil on the floor. This was a trap. He saw the knife lying 10 feet away. He began to crawl toward it, moving on all fours, his breath coming in ragged heaves. Julian tapped the screen of his iPad. Suddenly, a sound filled the house. It came from the hidden smart speakers in the kitchen, to the left of the foyer. Giggle, giggle, giggle. It was the sound of a child laughing, high-pitched, distorted, and echoing. Julian had pulled it from a horror movie soundboard. But in the empty, darkened house, it sounded terrifyingly real. Richard froze. His head snapped toward the kitchen. "Julian," he roared, "come out here. I am going to break every bone in your body." He abandoned the knife for a moment and scrambled toward the kitchen, using the wall for support to keep from slipping again. He disappeared into the archway. Julian tapped the screen again. Now, the sound came from the library, on the completely opposite side of the house. "Daddy, are you looking for us?" It was a recording of Julian's voice from years ago, before the accident, looped and distorted to sound ghostly. Richard came charging out of the kitchen, slipping and sliding, crashing shoulder first into the doorframe. He looked toward the library. He was confused. The sound was bouncing, disorienting him. "Stop it!" he screamed, grabbing a Ming vase from a side table and hurling it into the darkness. The porcelain shattered. The crash deafening. Stop playing games. He was losing control. The precise, calculating sociopath was dissolving into a violent, reactive animal. He picked up a heavy wooden chair and smashed it against the wall, reducing it to splinters. He was trying to intimidate the house itself, trying to scare us out of hiding with a display of raw power. "Show yourselves," he bellowed, his voice cracking. "I know you are watching. I am going to burn this whole place down with you inside it." Julian looked at me. His face was illuminated by the screen, calm and focused. "He is terrified," Julian whispered. "He cannot see us. He cannot control the environment. He is reacting to stimuli like a lab rat." Julian swiped a finger across the tablet. The lights in the foyer flickered. Strobe effect. On, off, on, off. Richard shielded his eyes, screaming in frustration. He was spinning in circles in the center of the oily floor. A dark, slick figure in the flashing light. He looked less like a man and more like a demon rising from a pit of slime. He finally spotted the knife again. He lunged for it, grabbing the handle. He stood up, using the banister for balance, and looked up the stairs. His eyes locked onto the darkness of the second-floor landing. He couldn't see us behind the balusters, but he knew. Logic dictated that high ground was the only defensive position. "I see you," he lied, his voice dropping to a low, menacing hiss. "I see you up there, Amelia, hiding behind the cripple." He wiped the oil from the blade onto his pants. "I am coming up," he said, taking the first step onto the carpeted stairs. "And when I get there, I am not going to make it quick anymore. I am going to make it last for days." He took another step. The carpet gave him traction. He was leaving the kill zone of the foyer and entering the siege tower of the staircase. Julian looked at me. He didn't have to say a word. The oil had done its job. The psychological warfare had done its job. But now, the physical confrontation was inevitable. Richard was hurt. He was humiliated. And he was armed. And he was climbing toward us with the unstoppable momentum of a nightmare. "Get ready with the spray," Julian whispered, closing the cover of his iPad. "The game is over. Now we fight." I raised the bottle of chili ammonia mixture. My hand was shaking, but not from fear anymore. It was shaking from the adrenaline of a woman who was done being a victim. I watched the top of Richard's head rising above the steps, his breathing ragged and wet, the knife gleaming in the strobe light. "Come on, Richard," I thought. "Come and meet your family." The darkness of the upstairs landing offered us no shelter, only a momentary delay of the inevitable. Richard's eyes, adjusting to the gloom and fueled by a predatory instinct, had locked onto the subtle movement of my shadow against the wall. He did not need to see my face to know where I was. Fear has a scent, and for years, he had been the connoisseur of mine. "There you are," he hissed. the sound traveling up the staircase with chilling clarity. He began to ascend. He did not run. He moved with the heavy, deliberate stomps of a man who knew the exits were barred. His leather shoes, slick with the vegetable oil from the foyer, squelched against the plush wool runner of the stairs, leaving dark, greasy stains with every step. He was a monster rising from a swamp, his expensive shirt ruined, his hair plastered to his forehead, and the serrated hunting knife gripped tight in his right hand. "Run," Julian whispered, "to the bedroom, now." But I was not ready to retreat just yet. I had a weapon in my hand, a crude chemical grenade that we had mixed with desperate hope. As Richard reached the midpoint of the stairs, right where the staircase curved under the crystal chandelier, I leaned over the banister. "Eat this, Richard!" I screamed, my voice unrecognizable to my own ears. I hurled the first modified spray bottle. It was not a graceful throw, but it was accurate. The plastic bottle, filled with the volatile mixture of industrial oven cleaner, ammonia, and chili powder, struck the wooden step directly in front of his face. The impact cracked the nozzle, and the pressurized liquid exploded outward in a rusty orange cloud. I threw the second bottle immediately after, aiming for his chest. It burst against his sternum, soaking his shirt and splashing up into his neck and jaw. Richard roared. It was not a scream of pain, but a bellow of shock and rage. The chemical cocktail did its work instantly. The ammonia hit his mucous membranes like a sledgehammer, and the chili powder found its way into his eyes and nose. He stumbled backward, his free hand clawing at his face, coughing violently. The sound was wet and ragged, the sound of lungs rejecting poison. "You bitch," he hacked, spitting saliva and oil onto the carpet. "I will kill you. I will peel the skin off your face." He bent double, wheezing, his eyes streaming with tears. But he did not fall. He did not turn back. The pain seemed to act as a fuel, igniting a reserve of adrenaline that overrode his body's natural desire to stop. He wiped his eyes with his oily sleeve, smearing the chemicals further, making it worse. But he forced his eyelids open. They were red, swollen, and murderous. He took another step up. Then another. He was blindly charging through the chemical fog, swinging the knife wildly in the air to ward off any further attacks. "Go!" I yelled to Julian. We scrambled down the hallway toward the master bedroom. Julian moved with a surprising speed, half running, half shuffling, his atrophied legs working harder than they ever had. I was right behind him, the Sig Sauer heavy in my hand. We reached the double doors of the master suite. Julian threw himself inside, and I followed. Slamming the heavy doors shut, I reached for the lock, but Julian grabbed my wrist, stopping me. "Do not lock it," he commanded, his eyes wide. The trap. I froze. I remembered the copper wire wrapped around the brass handle on the outside, connected to the live extension cord Julian had spliced. If I locked it, the circuit might ground out, or worse, I might touch the metal myself. "Stand back," Julian ordered. We retreated into the center of the room. It was a vast space, dominated by a four-poster bed and a wall of windows overlooking the cliffs. Now, it felt like a cage. We heard Richard in the hallway. He was coughing, a dry hacking sound that got closer with every second. He was dragging his hand along the wall, leaving a smear of oil and sweat on the expensive wallpaper. "Open the door. Emilia," he screamed. His voice was close. "Right outside. Open it, or I will kick it down and start with your fingers." I raised the gun. My hands were shaking so violently that the front sight was dancing in circles. I gripped it with both hands, trying to steady my breathing, trying to remember what little I knew about aiming. Point and squeeze, point and squeeze. We watched the brass handle. It began to turn. Richard did not hesitate. He grabbed the handle with his full, sweaty grip, intending to shove the door open with brute force. Zap! The sound was sharp and loud, like a whip cracking in the small hallway. It was followed instantly by a smell, the distinct, acrid odor of ozone and singing hair. Richard screamed. This time, it was a high-pitched shriek of pure physiological shock. The 120 volts of electricity coursing through the copper wire found the path of least resistance through his sweat-soaked hand, up his arm, and across his chest. We heard a heavy thud against the hallway wall as the current threw him backward. The connection broke. "Did we get him?" I whispered. Julian shook his head grimly. "It is household current. It hurts like hell, and it might numb his arm. But it won't kill a man his size. Get ready." Silence fell for a moment, just the sound of heavy, labored breathing from the other side of the wood. Then, a low, guttural growl started, building into a roar. He slammed his body against the door. Thud, the wood splintered around the lock. The electric trap had failed to stop him. It had only enraged him further. Thud. He hit it again. The frame cracked. Crash. The double doors flew open, one of them hanging off its top hinge. Richard stood in the doorway. He looked like a demon who had crawled through every circle of hell to get to us. His shirt was torn and stained yellow and orange. His face was swollen and red. His eyes bloodshot slits. His right arm, the one that had grabbed the handle, hung limp at his side, the nerves temporarily fried. But the knife was in his left hand now. He had switched grips. He stepped into the room. "Stay back!" I screamed, leveling the gun at his chest. "I will shoot. I swear to God. Richard, I will shoot you." Richard stopped. He looked at the gun, then at me. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his cracked lips. He began to laugh. It was a wheezing, broken sound. "You?" he rasped, taking a step forward. "You won't shoot. Emilia, look at you. You are shaking like a leaf." He took another step. "I am warning you," I cried, my finger tightening on the trigger. He shook his head, his eyes locking onto mine with a hypnotic intensity. "You are a nurse. Emilia, you spent your whole life saving people. You do not have it in you to take a life. That is why I picked you. You are soft. You are weak. You are a stray dog I picked up from the gutter and put in a silk collar." He was using his voice, his command, the psychological dominance he had held over me for 3 years. He was betting his life on my cowardice. "I gave you everything." He sneered, inching closer. "I gave you a home. I gave you money. I gave you a purpose. And without me, you are nothing. You are just a pathetic little girl playing dress-up in a mansion she doesn't deserve." His words hit me like physical blows. They tapped into every insecurity, every doubt I had ever felt. For a split second, I hesitated. That second was all he needed. He lunged. He moved with a speed that belied his injuries. He closed the 10 feet between us in a heartbeat. I pulled the trigger. Bang! The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. The recoil jerked my arms up, and the smell of gunpowder filled the air. I missed the center mass. I had closed my eyes for a fraction of a second when I fired. The bullet did not hit his heart. It tore through the fleshy part of his left shoulder, spinning him around but not stopping him. Blood sprayed onto the white carpet, a bright, shocking red. He grunted, stumbling, but the momentum carried him forward. His good hand, the left one holding the knife, swung out. The handle of the knife struck my wrist, knocking the gun from my hand. It skittered across the floor and slid under the bed. "No!" I screamed. Richard backhanded me. It was a clumsy blow with his injured arm, but it was heavy enough to send me sprawling. I hit the floor hard. The wind knocked out of me. Before I could scramble away, he was on top of me. He dropped the knife to use his hand. He straddled my waist, pinning me down with his heavy thighs. His face was inches from mine, dripping sweat and blood onto my cheeks. He looked insane. "You ungrateful bitch," he whispered, saliva flying from his mouth. He clamped his left hand around my throat. His right arm was still useless, dangling at his side, but his left hand was strong enough. He squeezed. My airway closed. The world instantly began to shrink. I clawed at his face, digging my nails into his cheeks, into his eyes. But he didn't even flinch. He was running on pure endorphins and rage. "Die," he hissed. "Just die already." Black spots danced in my vision. The sound of blood rushing in my ears drowned out his heavy breathing. I looked up at the ceiling, at the expensive crown molding, and thought, this is it. After all that fighting, I am going to die on the floor of the master bedroom. I could feel my consciousness slipping, a dark tide pulling me under. Then, I heard a sound. Whirr! It was the high-pitched whine of an electric motor pushed to its absolute limit. Richard heard it too. He lifted his head, confusion flickering in his eyes. From the corner of the room, near the walk-in closet, a silver blur was accelerating. It was Julian. He was not in the wheelchair. He was driving the wheelchair. He was standing on the back of the frame, gripping the handles like a chariot driver, his thumb jamming the joystick forward to maximum speed. And the chair was not empty. We had loaded the seat with dumbbells from Richard's workout corner earlier. 2 50-pound weights were strapped in with a belt. The chair, already heavy with its battery, was now a 200-pound battering ram moving at 8 miles per hour. Richard tried to turn. He tried to get off me. He was too late. The metal footrests of the wheelchair, reinforced steel designed to take a beating, slammed directly into Richard's right shin, the leg he had planted to keep his balance on top of me. Crack! The sound was louder than the gunshot. It was the dry, sharp snap of the tibia and fibula breaking cleanly in two. Richard's scream tore through the room. It was a sound of pure, animal agony that shattered the windows of the soul. His leg buckled completely, bending at an angle that legs are not supposed to bend. The force of the impact threw him off me. He rolled across the floor, clutching his shattered leg, howling. I gasped, sucking in air, my throat burning like fire. I rolled onto my side, coughing, trying to get oxygen back into my brain. Julian let the wheelchair crash into the wall and jumped off. He landed awkwardly on his weak legs but scrambled over to me. "Get up!" he yelled, pulling at my arm. "Finish it!" Richard was writhing on the floor, his face a mask of pale shock. The fight had drained out of him the moment the bone snapped. Now, there was only pain. He reached for the gun under the bed, his fingers brushing the carpet, trying to find it. I saw the heavy brass lamp on the bedside table. It was a solid piece, shaped like an anchor. I stood up. My legs were shaking. My throat was bruised, and my heart was pounding a frantic rhythm. But I was alive. I grabbed the lamp. I ripped the cord from the wall. I walked over to Richard. He looked up at me. His eyes were wide, filled with fear for the first time. He saw the woman he had called weak. He saw the nurse he had called a stray dog. Amelia. "Wait," he gurgled, raising a hand in defense. I didn't say a word. I didn't have a witty one-liner. I just swung. I brought the heavy brass base down with all the strength I had left. Thud. It struck him on the temple. Richard's eyes rolled back in his head. His hand dropped to the floor. His body went limp. A sack of broken bones and failed ambitions. The room fell silent. I stood over him, the lamp still clutched in my hand, my chest heaving. I waited for him to move. I waited for the monster to rise again. But he didn't. He just lay there, bleeding onto the white carpet he had always been so obsessed with keeping clean. "Is he dead?" Julian asked, his voice small. I dropped the lamp. I knelt beside Richard and pressed 2 fingers to his neck, just below the jawline. My nurse's training was automatic. "No," I said, my voice rasping through my bruised throat. "Pulse is strong. He is just unconscious." I looked at Julian. The boy was leaning against the wall, trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. He looked at me, and then he looked at his father's broken body. "We won," he whispered. "Not yet," I said, standing up and wiping the blood from my face. "The bomb is still ticking." We did not have time to celebrate his fall. The adrenaline that had fueled my swing with the lamp was fading, replaced by a cold, trembling urgency. Richard was unconscious, a heap of broken arrogance on the white carpet. But he was still dangerous. A predator is never more lethal than when it wakes up wounded. "Get the rope," I commanded, my voice sounding raspy and foreign to my own ears. The rope from his bag. Julian nodded and scrambled out of the room. I stayed with Richard, the Sig Sauer pistol retrieved from under the bed and gripped tightly in my hand. I watched his chest rise and fall. Even in sleep, his face held a sneer, a permanent etching of his superiority. I wanted to put a bullet in his head right then and there. I wanted to end the threat permanently, but I was a nurse. The instinct to preserve life, even a life as rotted as his, was a hard habit to break. And Julian was right. We needed him to answer for this. Death was too easy. Julian returned dragging the heavy coil of nautical rope Richard had brought to bind us. The irony was bitter on my tongue. We dragged Richard, a difficult, grunting effort due to his dead weight, over to the structural limestone pillar that separated the sleeping area from the sitting room. We worked in silence, a grim efficiency between us. We tied his wrists behind the pillar. We bound his ankles, being careful around the shattered right leg, not out of mercy, but because moving it might shock him into consciousness before we were ready. We used the duct tape from his bag to secure his torso to the stone. He was trussed up like a sacrificial animal in the center of the temple he had built for himself. "He is waking up," Julian whispered, stepping back. Richard's eyelids fluttered. He groaned, a sound that started low in his throat and ended in a sharp intake of breath as the pain from his leg registered. His eyes snapped open. For a second, there was confusion. Then, memory flooded back. He jerked against the ropes, his face contorted in agony. "Ah!" he screamed, squeezing his eyes shut. "My leg! You broke my leg!" He looked at me, then at Julian, then at the ropes binding him. The fear I had seen earlier was gone, replaced by a seething, venomous hatred. He did not look defeated. He looked like a king who had momentarily lost his crown, but not his power. "You are making a mistake, Amelia," he spat, blood from a cut on his lip spraying onto his shirt. "You think tying me up changes anything? You think you have won?" I stood before him, the gun lowered but ready. "We are alive, Richard. That is a win." He laughed, a wet, gargling sound. "You are alive for now, but you are still stupid. Do you know who I played golf with last Sunday? Chief Miller? The police chief. Do you know who manages my legal fund? The best sharks in New York?" He leaned forward as much as the ropes allowed, his eyes drilling into mine. "Here is how this goes," he said, his voice dropping to a confident growl. "I will tell them you had a psychotic break. I will tell them you drugged the boy and attacked me when I came home to check on you. Look at the scene. Amelia, you have a gun. You have chemical weapons. I am the victim here. I am the husband who was assaulted by his crazy wife. Who do you think they will believe? The billionaire CEO or the former nurse with a history of anxiety?" He was right. In the world of the wealthy, the truth was flexible. He could spin this. He could bury us in legal fees and false narratives until we were the ones in prison. My heart began to hammer again. Julian stepped forward. He did not look at Richard. He looked at the massive 85-inch television mounted on the wall opposite the bed. He picked up the remote. "You are right, Father," Julian said calmly. His use of the word father was a sharp blade. His voice was steady. The voice of the son Richard never knew he had. "The police might believe you. The judges might believe you. Money buys a lot of doubt." Julian pressed the power button. The screen flared to life, but, Julian continued, turning to face the man bound to the pillar, "It is hard to buy silence when the whole world is screaming." The screen displayed a web browser. It was a YouTube live stream page. The view count in the corner was ticking upward furiously. 2.4 million viewers. Richard squinted at the screen. The image on the TV was familiar. It was us. It was a wide-angle shot of the master bedroom, taken from the camera hidden in the smoke detector. It showed Richard tied to the pillar. It showed me holding the gun. "What is this?" Richard whispered, the color draining from his face. "I have been streaming," Julian said, his voice devoid of pity. "Since you walked through the front door, I hacked the main server and redirected the feed to a public channel." Julian tapped his iPad. The video on the screen rewound. It showed Richard entering the house with the gas mask. It showed him slipping on the oil. It showed him pulling the knife. It showed him screaming that he would peel the skin off my face. It showed him confessing to the murder of his first wife. It showed him mocking me, calling me a stray dog, admitting to the insurance fraud. Every word, every threat, every ugly, naked truth. Richard stared at the screen, his mouth slightly open. The physical pain in his leg seemed to vanish, replaced by a catastrophic internal collapse. 2 million people. Richard, Julian said, they saw you try to kill us. They heard you admit to killing Mom. There is no spin for this. There is no lawyer good enough to fix this. You are not a victim. You are the most hated man in America right now. Julian scrolled down to the comments section. It was a blur of text moving so fast it was unreadable. Monster? Call the FBI? I hope he rots. Justice for the mom. Richard's breathing became shallow and rapid. He looked around the room as if searching for an exit, but the walls of his reality were closing in. It was not the prison cell he feared. It was the shame. For a narcissist like Richard Sterling, public humiliation was a fate worse than death. The mask was not just cracked, it was pulverized. Then, a sound cut through the room. It was Richard's phone. It had fallen out of his pocket during the fight and was lying on the carpet near his feet. I walked over and picked it up. The screen was lit up with notifications, dozens of missed calls, hundreds of texts. The names flashed by: lawyer, Goldberg, PR crisis team, board member Steve. It rang again. The caller ID said, Victoria. I looked at Richard. He was staring at the phone with a desperate, pathetic hope. Maybe she would help. Maybe his 25-year-old escape plan was still viable. I swiped the green button and put it on speaker. I held the phone up to Richard's face. Richard! Victoria's voice shrieked from the speaker. It was high, hysterical, and loud. Richard, are you watching this? You idiot. You absolute moron. Victoria Richard croaked. Honey, listen, shut up, she screamed. Do not call me honey. I just saw the news. It is everywhere. Richard, Twitter, TikTok, CNN. They are playing the clip of you admitting to the insurance fraud on loop. Victoria, I can fix this, Richard pleaded, tears of desperation welling in his eyes. I have the accounts offshore. We can still go. I can... You have nothing, she yelled. The feds are already raiding the biolab's office. They are freezing the assets. I am not going down with you, you old fool. I am at the airport. I am taking the next flight to Paris, and I am changing my name. Do not contact me. Do not ever mention my name. There was a pause. And by the way, she added, her voice dripping with venom, the baby isn't yours. It is your personal trainer's. I just needed someone to pay for the penthouse. Rot in hell. Richard. Click. The line went dead. The silence that followed was absolute. Richard Sterling died in that moment. His heart was still beating. But the man he believed himself to be, the genius, the lover, the tycoon, evaporated. His head slumped forward, his chin resting on his chest. A single sob racked his body. It was a pathetic, broken sound. He had lost his company. He had lost his freedom. He had lost his reputation. He had lost his trophy mistress. He was stripped bare, exposed as a fraud and a killer before millions of strangers. I looked at him, feeling a strange hollowness. I expected to feel joy, but I only felt exhaustion. It is over. Richard, I said quietly. Richard began to chuckle. It started as a low rumble in his chest, then grew into a wheezing, maniacal laugh that shook his bound frame. He lifted his head. His eyes were wild, glazed with the madness of a man who has nothing left to lose. Over? He wheezed, a bloody grin spreading across his face. You think it is over because you humiliated me? You think a few cameras and a breakup call can stop me? He leaned his head back against the pillar and stared at the ceiling. I told you, Amelia, if I go down, I take everything with me. I am a scorched earth kind of guy. What are you talking about? I asked, a cold knot forming in my stomach. Julian stiffened beside me. You will just save the time or the trouble. We are all going to hell together. The countdown had begun, and with it, the atmosphere in the room shifted from the heat of combat to the cold. Crystalline terror of impending annihilation. 10 minutes. We had 10 minutes to dismantle a doomsday device or flee a blast radius that Richard promised would turn the cliffside into a crater. "We cannot leave him," I said, my voice tight with panic. I looked at the man bound to the pillar. If the bomb goes off, it takes the whole foundation. The cliff will collapse. It won't just be the house. It will be the neighbors, the road, everything. And we cannot carry him, Julian countered. He was looking at Richard's leg, which was bent at a sickening angle. "We can't drag 200 pounds of dead weight down 3 flights of stairs in 10 minutes. Not with that injury." Richard laughed. It was a wet, bubbling sound, red foam gathering at the corners of his mouth. "But look at the Bluetooth connection on his watch." He pointed to the smartwatch still pulsing red on Richard's wrist. "Bluetooth has a limited range, 30 feet, maybe 50 if there are no walls. If the receiver was in the basement, buried under concrete and steel, the signal would be weak up here." Julian leaned in, inspecting the watch face without touching it. "The signal strength is full bars," he whispered. "The receiver isn't in the basement. It is close. It is right above us." I looked up at the ceiling. Above the master bedroom was the attic space, the area where the central HVAC units and the dumbwaiter motor were housed. "He wants us to drag him to the basement," Julian realized, his eyes widening. "He wanted us to run down there. He wanted to trap us in the hole before he blew the roof down on top of us. He wants to bury us alive." Richard's smile faltered. For the first time, he looked annoyed. "You are too smart for your own good. You freak." "We don't need the code," Julian said, turning to me. "We need to separate the trigger from the explosive. We need to break the connection safely." "How?" I asked. "If the heart rate stops, it blows. If the timer ends, it blows. We move the watch," Julian said. "We send it away, far enough that the signal drops. If the bomb is in the attic, and we send the watch to the roof, no, wait." He looked at the dumbwaiter door set into the wall of the hallway. It was a small freight elevator used for sending champagne and snacks from the kitchen to the master suite and up to the rooftop terrace. "The dumbwaiter," Julian said. "It goes all the way to the roof terrace. If we put the watch inside and send it up, it will be right next to the explosives." "And then what?" I asked. "Then we run out the back," Julian said, "when the watch gets too far from Richard, or if the connection snaps. The bomb detonates, but it will detonate at the top of the house. The blast will go up and out. The structure might hold." It was a gamble. It was a terrifying, insane gamble. But we had 5 minutes left. "Do it," I said. I knelt beside Richard. He saw the knife in my hand, the same hunting knife he had tried to kill me with. His eyes went wide. "No," he screamed, struggling against the ropes. "You can't take it off. The sensor will know. It will trigger instantly." "We are not taking it off you," I said grimly. I grabbed his left arm. He thrashed, screaming curses, trying to pull away, but he was bound tight to the pillar. "Hold his arm," I yelled to Julian. Julian threw his body weight onto Richard's forearm, pinning it against the stone. Richard howled. "Don't you touch it. You will kill us all." I didn't aim for the clasp. I aimed for the rubber strap itself. I slid the serrated blade of the hunting knife between the watch band and Richard's skin. Careful not to touch the sensors on the back of the device. I am not taking the watch off the wrist. "Richard," I gritted out. "I am taking the wrist off the man." I wasn't actually going to cut his hand off, but he didn't know that. He screamed in pure terror, freezing for just a second. That was all I needed. I saw the rubber strap stretch. I sawed the knife upward. Snap, the band broke. I grabbed the watch face immediately, pressing my thumb against the heart rate sensor on the back, mimicking the pressure of skin. It was a trick I had learned in nursing school to fool old pulse oximeters. I prayed it would work on a smartwatch. The red light kept pulsing. It hadn't triggered. "Run!" Julian yelled. I scrambled up, clutching the watch like it was a live grenade. We sprinted into the hallway. The dumbwaiter door was right there. I punched the button. It seemed to take an eternity for the small stainless steel doors to slide open. 3 minutes. I threw the watch inside the small metal box. Julian slammed his hand onto the control panel. Rooftop terrace. Go. The motor whirred to life. The cables groaned. The box began to ascend, carrying the dead man's switch up toward the explosives Richard had hidden in the attic. "We have to go!" Julian shouted. He tried to run, but his legs finally gave out. The adrenaline that had allowed him to walk and fight was gone, leaving him with the muscles of a child who hadn't walked in 4 years. He crumpled to the carpet. I didn't stop. I scooped him up. He was heavy, 12 years of dead weight, but I lifted him with a strength that came from somewhere primal. I held him against my chest, his arms wrapping around my neck. The back door. Julian gasped into my ear. I hacked it. The server rebooted when he cut the power. The lock is open. We ran. We didn't take the stairs. That was too slow. We ran down the hallway to the servants' staircase at the back of the house, a narrow wooden spiral that Richard had forbidden us from using. I took the steps 2 at a time, my feet pounding a frantic rhythm. Behind us, in the master bedroom, I heard Richard screaming, "Come back! Don't leave me! Emilia!" His voice was full of terror. He knew what was coming. He was trapped in the center of the web he had spun, bound to a pillar, waiting for the thunder. We hit the ground floor. I kicked open the door to the mudroom. The air outside was cool and salty. I saw the heavy steel service door ahead. The green light on the keypad was lit. "Thank you, Julian," I sobbed. I threw my shoulder against the bar. The door swung open. We burst out into the afternoon sun. The brightness was blinding after the gloom of the shuttered house. We were on the rear patio, a slate expanse overlooking the ocean. "Keep running!" Julian screamed. "Get to the tree line." I didn't look back. I sprinted across the manicured lawn, my lungs burning, my legs feeling like lead. I clutched Julian tighter. 100 yards. 200 yards. We reached the edge of the property, where the perfectly trimmed grass met the wild scrub oak of the dunes. I dived behind a low stone wall that marked the property line, curling my body around Julian, shielding him with everything I had, and then the world ended. Boom! It was not a sound. It was a physical blow. The ground beneath us jumped. A wave of pressure rolled over us, sucking the air out of my lungs. I looked up, just peeking over the stone wall. The top of the Sterling mansion disappeared. A massive fireball, orange and black, erupted from the roof. It shredded the slate tiles, pulverized the chimney, and blew the attic apart. The shockwave shattered every window on the top floor instantly, sending a shower of glass diamonds raining down onto the patio. The dumbwaiter shaft had acted like a cannon barrel. The explosion had been funneled upward, just as Julian had predicted. The roof terrace was gone. The master bedroom ceiling had collapsed, but the house stood. The basement foundation held. The first floor held. The main structural pillars, built into the limestone cliff, groaned but did not give way. Debris rained down around us. Chunks of wood, insulation, twisted metal. A piece of burning shingle landed near my foot, and I kicked it away. Then, silence returned. It was a ringing silence, punctuated only by the car alarms wailing in the distance and the sound of falling dust. I sat up, coughing, brushing the gray dust from Julian's hair. He was shaking, his eyes wide, staring at the smoking ruin of his father's house. "Did we kill him?" Julian whispered. I looked at the house. The master bedroom was a gaping hole. The roof was gone, but the pillar, the structural pillar in the center of the room. I squinted through the smoke. The walls of the bedroom had been blown out, but the central limestone column was still standing. It was blackened, scorched, and surrounded by rubble. But it was upright. And at the base of it, buried under a mountain of drywall and expensive furniture, something was moving. "No," I said, watching the dust settle. "The devil is hard to kill." We heard sirens then, a lot of them. Police, fire, ambulance. They were coming up the coast road, a symphony of red and blue lights flashing against the trees. I stood up, pulling Julian to his feet. He leaned on me, but he stood tall. "Is it over now?" he asked. I looked at the wreckage. I looked at the smoke curling up into the perfect Hampton sky. I felt the bruise on my neck where Richard had choked me, and the weight of the gun I had left behind. I took a deep breath of the smoky air. Yes, I said. The story ends here. We started walking toward the driveway to meet the police. We didn't look back at the ruin. We didn't look back at the man trapped in the rubble of his own ego. We walked toward the flashing lights, hand in hand, leaving the darkness behind us. The chaos that descended upon the Sterling estate was a symphony of flashing lights and screaming sirens. It was the sound of the world finally paying attention. I stood at the edge of the property, my arm wrapped protectively around Julian, watching as the firefighters battled the flames that licked at the skeleton of the mansion. The roof was gone, blown into splinters by the blast we had engineered, but the bones of the house remained, a charred monument to Richard's failed ambition. It took them 20 minutes to dig him out. I watched with a cold, detached satisfaction as 4 firemen emerged from the smoke-filled foyer carrying a stretcher. Richard Sterling was not the titan of industry who had left that morning in a Porsche. He was a ruin. His clothes were shredded. His face was masked in soot and blood, and his broken leg was splinted in a way that looked painful even from a distance. He was conscious, though. His eyes darted around frantically, landing on the police officers swarming the driveway. He spotted Chief Miller, his old golf partner. "Jim," Richard croaked, trying to lift his head. "Jim, thank God. You have to arrest them. My wife went crazy. She blew up the house." Chief Miller walked over to the stretcher. He did not smile. He did not offer a hand. He looked down at Richard with a mixture of disgust and pity. "Save it, Richard," the chief said, his voice flat. "We saw the live stream. Everyone saw it." Richard froze. The reality of his situation crashed down on him harder than the roof had. The chief pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. He clicked one cuff onto Richard's left wrist and the other to the metal rail of the stretcher. "Richard Sterling, you are under arrest for attempted murder, insurance fraud, and the murder of Catherine Sterling. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you start using it." As they loaded him into the ambulance, Richard turned his head. His eyes found mine across the lawn. There was no anger left in them, only a terrified realization that he was utterly alone. I did not look away. I held his gaze until the ambulance doors slammed shut, severing him from my life forever. By the time the sun began to set, the media had arrived. Vans with satellite dishes lined the street. Reporters jostled against the police tape, hungry for a quote from the woman who had turned the tables on a monster. A young officer tried to shield me. "Ma'am, you don't have to talk to them. We can get you out the back way." I looked at Julian. He was sitting on the bumper of a police cruiser, a paramedic checking his vitals. He looked exhausted, dusty, and small, but for the first time in 4 years, he looked free. "No," I said, straightening my spine. "I am done hiding." I walked over to the bank of microphones. The flashes were blinding, a strobe light of curiosity. I raised a hand, and the shouting questions died down. "My name is Amelia Stonebridge," I said, my voice steady and clear. "And today, I stopped being a victim. Richard Sterling built this house to be a prison. He thought he could bury his secrets and his family in the dark, but he forgot one thing." I reached out and took Julian's hand. He stood up, leaning heavily on me, but standing on his own 2 feet. He forgot that even the darkest night ends when the sun rises. My stepson is not a cripple. He is a survivor. And Richard Sterling is not a powerful man. He is just a criminal who got caught. The clip of that interview played on every news channel in the country for a week. Justice moved swiftly. 2 hours after Richard was pulled from the rubble, Victoria was intercepted at John F. Kennedy International Airport. She was attempting to board a first-class flight to Paris using a fake passport. When the agents handcuffed her at the gate, she screamed that she was pregnant and innocent, but the text messages on her seized phone painted a very different picture. She turned state's evidence against Richard within 24 hours, trading her silence for a reduced sentence. She told them everything: the offshore accounts, the fake merger, the plan to frame me, but the real reckoning came 6 months later. The courtroom was packed. It seemed like half of New York wanted to see the fall of the Sterling Empire. Richard sat at the defense table, looking shrunken in his orange jumpsuit. His leg had healed poorly, leaving him with a permanent limp, a physical reminder of the wheelchair that had taken him down. When the prosecutor called the star witness, a hush fell over the room. The bailiff opened the double doors. Julian Sterling walked in. He did not use a wheelchair. He walked with the aid of forearm crutches, his gait rhythmic and determined. 6 months of intensive physical therapy had rebuilt the muscles that had wasted away. He looked taller, stronger, and infinitely older than his 12 years. He took the stand. He swore to tell the truth. And then, he looked directly at his father. Richard tried to stare him down, tried to summon that old intimidation. But Julian just smiled. It was a small, sad smile. He told the jury everything. He described the yacht accident in vivid detail. He described the 4 years of silence, the nights spent listening to Richard plot his next move, the terror of being a prisoner in his own body. He played the audio recordings he had made with the brick phone. When the recording of Richard calling me a stray dog and laughing about the murder plot played in the silent courtroom. The jury refused to look at the defense table. The disgust in the air was palpable. Richard's lawyer, a high-priced shark who had been confident in his opening statement, practically gave up during the cross-examination. He asked Julian if he had exaggerated his condition. "I didn't exaggerate." Julian replied calmly, "I survived. There is a difference." The verdict came back in under 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge, a stern woman who had clearly been moved by Julian's testimony, did not show mercy. "Richard Sterling," she said, looking down from the bench, "you are a predator who fed on the vulnerability of those you were sworn to protect. You possess a level of malice that is rare even in this court. I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole." Richard screamed as the bailiffs dragged him away. He screamed my name. He screamed that it wasn't fair. But his voice was just noise now, fading into the background of a world that had moved on. The civil suits followed. The court seized everything. The remains of the Hamptons estate, the liquid assets, the hidden offshore accounts that the FBI uncovered. It was a fortune. Millions of dollars that had been tainted by greed and blood. I didn't want a cent of it, neither did Julian. We took the settlement money and did the only thing that felt right. We established the Phoenix Foundation. Its mission was simple: to provide legal aid, safe housing, and resources for women and children escaping domestic abuse. We turned Richard's legacy of control into a lifeline for freedom. 1 year later, the air here smelled different. It smelled of salt and jasmine, not expensive cologne and fear. I stood on the deck of a small, weathered bungalow on the coast of California. It was a modest house, miles away from the gilded cage of the Hamptons. There were no smart home systems, no security cameras, just a screen door that squeaked when you opened it, and a garden full of wild sunflowers. I wiped my hands on my apron. I had been planting tomatoes. It was a simple task, digging in the dirt, but it brought me a peace I had never known. "Amelia, look." I looked up, down on the beach. A boy was running. Julian was 13 now. He still had a slight limp, a hitch in his step that might never fully go away. But he was fast. He was chasing a golden retriever puppy we had named Buster. The dog was barking, leaping into the surf, and Julian was laughing. It was a real laugh, loud, uninhibited, and full of joy. He stopped and waved at me, his silhouette framed by the setting sun over the Pacific. I waved back, feeling a lump form in my throat. We had done it. We had walked through the fire and come out the other side. The nightmares had stopped about 3 months ago. Julian was in a regular school now, enrolled in the gifted program. He was already top of his class in computer science. He had friends. He had a life. I walked down the wooden steps to the sand. The ocean breeze tangled my hair. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the clean, cold air. I thought about Richard, sitting in a 6 by 8 cell, staring at a concrete wall. I wondered if he thought about us. I wondered if he realized that his arrogance had been the architect of his own destruction. Julian ran up to me, breathless and flushed. "Did you see?" he gasped. "Buster caught the frisbee." "I saw." I smiled, brushing the sand from his cheek. "You were pretty fast, too." Julian looked at his legs. "Yeah, I am getting there." He looked up at me, his blue eyes serious for a moment. "Do you think he knows?" Julian asked. "Who?" "Richard. Do you think he knows we are happy?" I looked out at the vast, endless horizon. "I don't think it matters what he knows." "Julian," I said softly, "it only matters what we know. We survived the winter to see the summer, and the summer is beautiful." Julian nodded. He grabbed the frisbee and threw it again for the dog. "Come on, Amelia, race you to the water." He took off running. I laughed and ran after him. I was 33 years old, a widow, a survivor, and a mother to the bravest boy I had ever known. Richard had tried to write the end of our story. He had scripted a tragedy, but we had torn up his script and written our own ending. He left me a crippled son and a murder plot, but I gave him back a life sentence and took the most precious thing: the genius son he never deserved to be a father to. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It was an emotional journey to write, and I hope you felt every twist and turn alongside Amelia and Julian. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Please leave a comment below sharing your city or country, and let me know what you thought of Julian's incredible transformation. If you enjoyed this drama, please smash that like button, subscribe to the Sweet Rose Drama channel for more gripping stories, and hit the hype button to help this video reach more people. Your support means the world to us.